wonderful writer. She's a management consultant. But rather than me tell you all about her, Johanna, why don't you introduce yourself?
So people know me as the pragmatic manager, and I'm all about how do I help people adapt what they're currently doing for their product development to be more effective. And that's really it in a nutshell.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you've been doing this for quite some time. We've crossed each other's paths over many years. So
I actually started my consulting company back in 1994, so a long time ago.
Yeah, that's pretty much when I started my career as well. So yeah,
I have earned all of my gray hair, all of it.
as I have earned all of my no hair. So we'll go with that. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about when we had you on today, you had occasion to write a book, a wonderful book, I think, which aligns a lot with the species of remote AF, which is that, from chaos to successfully distributed teams and collaborate and deliver. Right? And I mean, distributed was a word that we were using a lot in the 2000s, etc. Probably remote has taken that over now, or remote / hybrid, or whatever you want to call it, but it's still that distributed thing. I read it. I had the occasion to read it a little while ago because obviously I have interviewed Mark Kilby, the other author, and know him quite well. And the interesting thing for me is many of the themes that you've written in there still fly within today. So I thought it might be interesting to talk to you a little bit about that. How do you see the things that you were talking about then, and how do you see they're happening now?
So when we wrote the book, we thought that remote and distributed and dispersed teams would be an option. Right? We never thought that the world, we thought that people would experiment, that people might choose to work from home or to work from a coffee shop, that more and more organizations would experiment with being remote first. But we never expected the pandemic. We never expected as many people as possible would work from home. And working from home is not the same as working remote. Let me take a drink.
Absolutely fine. Yeah, but that's very true, right?
Yeah, it's just water, so yeah, fine. So I think what's really interesting is we had assumed that people would find their reasonable environment. And when you are making sure the kids go to school and that you have to shovel the walk because there's snow, and you're trying to figure out how to go grocery shopping with your kids hanging around, and you're still trying to work 40 hours a week, working from home is not the same as remote work. And that's what a lot of us did for the past couple of years. So we were quite surprised. And for our first talks about the book, went through the principles of the Agile Manifesto, and we said, this goes, and this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. And everyone before the pandemic had said, what about face-to-face work? And lo and behold, we managed to figure out how to do not next to each other face to face, but through various meetings. I use Zoom. That we're doing this with Google Meet. However it is you do it, we can get to something reasonable, like face to face.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. I always thought that even though you never meant it to be, but from chaos to successful to distributed teams could not be a better title for what's happened to us in the last 2 years, actually. So if you were thinking
that. And the reason I asked Mark to write this book with me is because I had way too many very, very bad experiences because the team did not have reasonable hours of overlap. And that's our first principle. So if you cannot have a team in New York and in Singapore, right? You cannot have people in both places because they're offset by 12 hours. You don't have, we found a time to meet where it's relatively early for you and it's relatively late for me. And for intermittent meetings, that's totally fine. But if we had to work together every single day, I'm not sure. I forgot to ask you what time it is for you.
It's about 11:43 in the morning here, so it's
Oh, so
lunchtime.
that's not bad.
Not
Yeah,
too
that's
bad
not
for
bad.
me, but it's getting late for you, right?
Well, it's 8:45 for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the evening. So I'm still awake. I'm still coherent, but I'm not as I've already done my day of work. And
Yeah, that's right.
I think that when we don't have the right hours of overlap for the team, right? If I chose to work differently, if I started my day at 3 in the afternoon, right, we would have many more hours of overlap. However, I don't. I started at 7 in the morning, so that's why a given team has to figure out when do we work together.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, dynamic that's hitting right across the world. Now, previous to us turning on the record here, we were having a conversation. I want to sort of pique some interest around that as well, is thinking around, okay, a majority of the world went to remote. Some are still in remote and maybe bounce back into remote, which is where I am. But literally, I think hybrid, I think we all acknowledge it's going to be you're either fully remote or you're going to be in this hybrid situation. I don't think we're ever going back to the singularity of fully workplace because some people have had a good taste of it. We're going to have these kind of breaks and things. So having said that, where do you see the major focus is going to be that we need to focus on to allow that to work well, given what you've written and you've seen and you've done before? It is a fairly big switch to flip when you go hybrid.
Well, and I really think that people need to understand, are they going to be more satellite, where the bulk of the people really are relatively co-located, right, within 16 meters or maybe only 30 meters, but they are able to have in-person meetings. They're able to talk with each other easily, literally face to face. And one or two people are not there. That's a satellite team. A cluster team has a very different profile. A cluster team has a couple of people here, a couple of people there, a couple of people maybe in a third location, maybe one or two people satelliting around the cluster. I think a cluster team is really hard. And especially if people change which days they go into work.
Yeah. Mm.
So a bunch of my clients have people, they actually told people which days. I don't understand this at all, right? They said, you will be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or, well, 3 days, including Monday and Wednesday. You will be Tuesday and Thursday and a third day. And everybody works from home on Friday or some ridiculousness like that. I don't understand how that's going to work. How can you possibly organize a meeting if you don't know where people physically are, so you know how to organize the meeting? I don't understand the collaboration.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And the other thing that I see clients and I see across the world, and I'm sure you've come across this, is when they do move into the hybrid, one of the things they forget is that the people who are in the office immediately seem to assume the ascendancy of priority, and they start having conversations within there, and then they forget about the other people, or they haven't dialed them into meetings, or they haven't thought about the technology. Have you seen that happening? Are you managing that kind of work?
Oh yeah, that's one of the traps we wrote about. That's that's especially difficult for satellite teams if only one or two people are away. But in this new kind of hybrid thing, if there are only two people who are relatively co-located in the office, they decide that they are driving everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be a natural ascendancy because the cluster of face to face. But my conversation I'm having with people around that is, hang on, you're still. I don't like the word hybrid, by the way. I'll go on record for that. And my reasoning around that is because it gives forbearance to that thought that one team has more ascendancy than the other. What I say to them is, you're all remote. If one's out, one's not here, one's working from home, then you're all remote. It just depends on how remote you are from each other. So that's the first thing that you have to sort of instigate. And then I think that, they have to start thinking about the technology to make sure that everybody's involved. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been coaching a senior leader in one organization, and he keeps saying to me, I should be able, right? Notice the should. I should be able to get rid of some of the licenses, right? I should be able to save money on all these communications and all these tools. And I said, why do you think so? Well, some of the people are going to be back in the office. I said, and so how do you think that they will actually work with the other people? I mean, do you think that all the people back in the office will always get a conference room when they need it?
Yeah,
And
it's
he
not always.
said, yeah. I mean, so this particular organization is in a very urban area, right? Think downtown of any big city, which where office space is at a premium. They didn't have enough conference rooms before. They're not going to have enough now.
Yeah, and I think that's so for me, and you talk about it in the book, and I've heard you and Mark talk about it, and it lines up with the way I talk to it as well. It really is. You have to stop, and particularly now that we've changed the whole momentum around that kind of remote working, and you actually have to stop and contextually design it for the way you're going to interact, for the way you're going to work, and that means thinking about asynchronous and synchronous. I mean, you were talking about that then. How are you seeing that happen now?
So I'm actually getting a lot of requests for writing workshops, which I did not expect. I mean, I offer public writing workshops for us normal people, and but what I'm getting is requests for writing workshops specifically so people can prepare asynchronously for the synchronous meeting, right? So you've heard, I believe that Google does this, or maybe it's Amazon, that everybody takes 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning and reads the brief for what they're going to discuss. And a bunch of people have started to ask me about that because they know I write a lot. And writing, preparing with asynchronous preparation for the synchronous meeting is actually a really helpful thing to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think if you do work in that asynchronous slot, you just do that by rote. But if you haven't done it before, you have to stop and think about doing that, right? So yeah, and I'm going to take that away with me. So that's nice. Thank you. um, it was interesting you were talking about senior leader there, and I think that's a nice segue into something else we were talking about. And one of the things we talk about a lot is leadership in this new, whether you want to call it the new normal, the next normal, the new world, whatever it be, right? The brave new world. But the reality is it has changed the leadership paradigm, because when you have either fully remote or you have hybrid, it has changed with the leaders. And I think what I've heard over the period of time is, there have been a lot of finger pointing at the leaders to say that they're bad leaders. But I like to flip the coin on that and say, well, they've had just as hard a time as well, because you've got to look at the whole way that they would have managed, the whole way this has worked is flipped over. You've written some really great books on those. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the Modern Management Made Easy books, the piece about delegation and trust, I think most of the managers who are currently managers now, and especially senior leaders, were not did not grow up in a having a trusting relationship with their managers, and that has permeated their ideas about management. And now, and I used to recommend that people walk around, right? Management by walking around and listening, not so much talking, but listening. How do you listen when everybody is remote? It's,
Yeah.
I mean, do you just pop into a Zoom or a Meet or something? No. So, um, how do you have early warning? How do you get those early warning signals when something is wrong? You have to have different conversations and you have to extend trust even before people might, I'm using quotes now, deserve it. So I think that we have really asked a lot of our managers, not that they are not able to do it, but I think it's really hard for them to realize that not just the physical environment has changed, but we need to really change how we lead and serve people, as opposed to directing and controlling, that we lead and serve.
Yeah, and I would say to anyone, gratuitous plug here, but I was kindly provided those books with Joanna to have a read, and I would say to you, take the opportunity. They're brilliant. They really are. One of the things, my wording around it, but it's your theme. The thing I think for leaders at the moment, there's a mechanistic piece and there's a humanistic piece to it, and with the change to remote, the mechanisms or the mechanistic pieces of how they interact have changed, whether that be just from synchronous or tools or whatever that be, or even just having to understand Miro, right? There's a word nobody even knew probably 2 years ago. But then there's the humanistic piece of understanding now that people's work is in their home and home is in their work. There's a whole new responsibility on them. There's that, the cognitive load that people have to face into. What's your thoughts on that, Joanne?
So it is so tempting to want to be able to think that an organization is a well-oiled machine. And I have an organization of one. My organization is not well oiled at all. So what I say to people is embrace the messiness. Learn how to work inside the messiness and embrace that. And instead of looking for certainty and prediction, ask different questions. And the questions I always ask is, if you want to know how well things are going, ask about cycle time. How long does it take us to release something useful to our customers? And
Mm.
depending on the kind of products you have, what useful is going to depend. But if you start to ask those questions instead of what's the schedule of variance, you're going to get a much better information that you can then do something with, right? But the old um, the old cost accounting data really did not serve us well before, and it really does not serve us well now.
Yeah, I agree with you. So that's an interesting thing. That's a nice little segue into the information flow. I talk a lot about governing agility. You've heard that, and Esther and I, etc., and Phil Gadzinski, we're really passionate about that governing of the remote system, because it's thinking about the system being governed in totality, not just your PMOs, etc. Well, one of those things is the information flow, and it's the information that needs to be available or can be consumed that enables those leaders to make those experience decisions. Because, like you say, the old cost account doesn't really flow anymore. A lot of the reporting that's there is not the information. So what's the sort of stuff you think they should be aiming up at in that kind of information flow?
So I'm leaning much more towards the lean measures. So for example, with evaluating projects in the project portfolio, I always advocate you start with cost of delay as your one. If you only had to choose one ranking approach, this is for features in a backlog, what you need to do in a roadmap, projects in the project portfolio. You start with cost of delay, because while it's very comforting to think, oh, this is just a 3-week project, yeah, I've never seen that. So I just haven't. So if we start with cost of delay for evaluating our options, and then we start to think about options instead of commitments, and then we look at the cycle time, when do we actually release something to our customers, then we have a much better handle on the measures we need as opposed to the relatively easy measures we can capture now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's whether it be software, whether it be business, whether it be portfolio, that flies any way that you go, right? One of the conversations that I think I'm having quite a bit of just recently with the information flow, because we look at that, and that's an easy one for them to grip, right? Because it's tangible. The one that I find that I'm having conversations about is things like psychological safety, the well-being, team health, personal health information, and how you capture and flow that up. Even to the point where I've had leaders say, "Well, why do I want to know that?" And so then it's a conversation around, well, are you understanding where you really are at the moment? Are you seeing that as well? What's your thoughts?
So I tend to go for satisfaction. I ask teams to measure their satisfaction, and that's a signal, right? If we have too many people, and on a 5-point scale, right, just five. If we have too many people 3 and below, there's something wrong, right? If we have a lot of people between 2 and 4, there's probably something on the verge of being wrong or wrong. If we have more people 3 to 5, we're probably okay, and we might need to look a little bit at the team. But the first piece of data to gather is this business about satisfaction, because I'm not sure if I understand how to. I mean, there's ways to assess psychological safety, and I strongly advocate that managers learn how to run feedback labs and coaching labs with their teams. Right. So when I teach my leadership workshops, I run a feedback lab in the feedback week. I run a coaching lab in the coaching week, and I have this delegation and decisions chunk, which often challenges leaders to say, "Oh, when am I delegating?" Because I find that the micromanagement starts all the way at the top and gets its tendrils all the way down. So if I look at satisfaction, right, I'm not looking at happiness. Happiness is just too many things figure into happiness, but we can talk about satisfaction with work, and then we can figure out, is it, do we need to address psychological safety, do we need to address the career ladder, do we need to address the actual work, that people don't think there's any reason for this product, right? That starts to give us some data, and we can do a deeper dive into understanding what it is. But I find that, one-on-ones are a really good tool for figuring a lot of this stuff out.
Yeah, and they seem to have gone by the way, haven't they? So that's an interesting thing as you ask, have you sat down, even if it's screen to screen, right? And they seem to have gone by the way because they're busy trying to. What I find is that they go too far to the left in async and too far to the right in sync, and it's finding the balance. I was talking to Jim Benson about that earlier today, about just finding that balance that allows them to do that. I want to pick you up on something. I heard something really interesting there that you were saying about the delegation, and we talk a lot about those guide rails and those sorts of things about the delegation of the leadership downwards, because again, it's been exacerbated by this whole change. It was bad enough before, but now we have this situation where we're going to have people sitting there just learned helplessness, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. You're obviously running in those labs. I'm interested to hear about how you approach that with them.
So I break up the work into project-oriented practices, right? The actual technical work, and how the team could actually organize its own work and decide how to do it. And then the decisions that managers make. So Mark and I use the example of of the team boards in the book, and we often talk about this example in our talks. Anytime an organization insists on one kind of a board for every single team in the organization, they're not delegating a project practice, right? Every team has to figure out what board they need, because the teams that do almost all product focused work, where they understand their backlog, they can predict for a couple of weeks at a time. That it's fine if they use a Scrum board, totally fine. And then there are the teams that are totally interrupt driven. They cannot possibly use a Scrum board. They need to have individual columns that are probably different from all the other teams. And then there are the teams that get interrupted every so often. And those are just three kinds of teams, right? Do they need a swim lane? I'm not so sure I like swim lanes, but they need the flexibility to deal with their own board in their own time. And any organization, any manager that tries to say, everyone must use this board. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's management by total control, isn't it? And it's what we need to change in terms of not just what we're doing now, but in terms of the intentional way of managing right across everything that we do. We're getting close to the end of our time, so it would be also remiss of me if I didn't mention that you don't just do this serious work here. So this is all good work, and you enjoy the fun of it. But I know that you write fiction books as well, so I'm going to give you a little avenue for 2 seconds, because a good friend of mine, Christopher Bramley, is a very big fiction writer as well. I'm sure you know him. Do you just want to mention them for the listeners, so they might be interested?
So on my fiction page, on my website, jrothman.com, I have a list of the 5 collections of short stories I published last year. I'm working on a 6th collection, because when nobody is surprised. I am using short stories to bootstrap my fiction writing career. And why short stories? Because I can write one in a week. Right? It normally takes me a couple days. Sometimes I don't start it in the right place, right? There's all kinds of issues with fiction. However, I've been practicing. So I've been selling short stories. I've published these 5 collections. I'm working on another now. And when I have to do a collection, I need to do a cover. And at some point, they will also be in paper. That's one of my jobs this year, is to get all the collections in paper. So I am practicing with short stories in search of the novels I intend to write.
Brilliant. I had to give you the opportunity to just break that one, because it's always nice to see the other side of what people do, Okay, as I said, we're getting close to our time. I want to give you the opportunity here. If I was to say to you, give us your 3 top tips about improving the way you work in remote, hybrid, distributed, whatever you want to call it, what would they be, Johanna? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm pretty sure you can answer those.
So the first thing is to really make sure you have hours of overlap that work for the team. When we went rapidly remote, I actually suggested that people block out 20 or 30 minutes at a time, not a whole hour chunk. And you might have to do that still, right? So really work on those hours of overlap. The second thing is to really make sure that that the team renegotiates its working agreements every single time they change. Do you need different working agreements for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday than from Tuesday and Thursday? I mean, I don't know, right? But think about how you will meet, when you will meet, how will you use technology, right? All of that stuff has to be in the working agreements. And then the third thing, which probably should be first, this is why it's good that you talked to Mark already. But the third thing is really, how do we connect as humans? How do we keep our human connection when we are not in the same place? And we probably won't be for a long time.
Yes.
Let me add one more thing, because I know I'm slipping in a fourth there. At some point, we will be able to have more in-person, relatively short meetings. Take advantage of that time. When Mark and I wrote the book, we thought that all distributed teams should meet quarterly, right? At least quarterly, to get everybody together, to resync, to figure out what's going on. I'm not sure when we can do that, but that's part of the human connection piece.
I think that's great advice, because eventually, hopefully, eventually this will be a situation where we get back to some sort of ability to do so, and I think that's a brilliant idea. Look, I want to thank you for spending the time with us, Johanna, out of a busy day. And in fact, yours is the evening, so you should be having your meal. So this is your gratuitous plug moment. How does everybody get involved? Where can they find you?
So everything is on jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com. I have not yet posted my leadership workshops. Those are by personal, personal and private right now, but I'm getting ready. At some point, I will have them out. The Modern Management Made Easy books and From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, and all my other books are on my site. Yeah, so start there. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter. Yeah, all that good stuff.
Brilliant. All right, well, I have to thank you for your time. It's been wonderful having you, Johanna.
Thank you.